Sissy GS3. I stayed in my school uniform and after lunch Mum took me to the ice rink where I met up with Brian, Barbara and Joan. All three were already in their costumes and I must say I was very envious that they were in the show. I had had chicken pox when the auditions were held, so I had missed out. Brian was a coachman and had a splendid costume with a long coat and old-fashioned knee breeches and a three-cornered hat with an ostrich feather. He had a white frilly shirt and of course black skates. Brian was also one of the guests at the grand ball and for this he wore a dress suit and white gloves. Joan and Barbara were also part of the grand ball and wore gorgeous knee-length voile dresses with tight satin bodices and puff sleeves. Joan's dress was blue and Barbara's red. They both wore white tights, which matched their white skates. The boys and girls were paired off for the ball and it was a stunning spectacle with all the colored dresses swirling and flying out as the girls did their spins. Brian and Barbara were paired off and Joan and Alan Bin were paired. I would have been Joan's partner had I not missed the auditions, but Alan was a very competent skater, so the only problem was my disappointment. Oh well, that's life, I thought as I watched them rehearse the grand ball. But then fate took a hand as during one of Barbara's spins her skate hit a fault in the ice and she fell very hard and simply lay still. The music was stopped and the teachers rushed onto the ice, but the poor girl had hit her head and was concussed. They had to use a stretcher to take her to the first aid room where she lay still until the ambulance took her to the hospital still unconscious. An interval was called so that the problem could be sorted out. The dance needed a full team to carry out the intricate routine and so the producer tried to find a stand-in for Barbara. Unfortunately all skaters were involved in this grand finale so not one was available. As usual Joan had a bright idea and told the producer that the GHS girl, me, sitting on the stand was an excellent skater and could easily cope with the dance steps. Her name is Gillian and she's new at the school, said Joan. Oh good, said the producer. Please ask Gillian whether she would help out just for this afternoon. She can borrow some skates from the skate store and stay in her school uniform to partner Brian. Without asking me, Joan went to the store and drew out some white girls' skates, then came up the stand to see if I would cooperate. I was flabbergasted and terrified out of my mind, but Joan said nobody would know who I was and I would easily pick up the basic dance routines. My poor heart was beating at a huge rate, but I reluctantly agreed and proceeded to take off my school shoes and pull on the skates. Joan had judged the size well and my nylon stockings made it easy to get the skates on. I laced them up securely and thank goodness they were fairly new and the blades were nice and straight. I clumped down the stairs on the rubber matting and stepped onto the ice where I set off to get the feel of the unfamiliar skates. Brian caught up with me and showed me a few of the dance steps. I did some spins and felt my school skirt fly out, bringing cold air round my legs. The bell sounded the end of the break and we all formed up to go through the dance routine. It was great fun dancing to the lovely waltz music and I was so excited that I never put a foot wrong. Of course, Brian kept up a running commentary, which helped a lot, and we completed the routines with no mishaps. The producer, who was a visitor from overseas, came over to where Brian, Joan, and I were standing and congratulated me on my excellent technique. She asked if she could keep me on hold in case Barbara was not fit enough to perform. Joan answered for me as I was hesitating and said, "Oh sure. Gillian would love to." With that the producer gave me a hug and left me standing in a daze. We decided not to tell anyone who the new skater was and left the rink as quickly as possible before any questions could be asked. I booked the skates in my name so that I would have good skates to wear if I had to perform. We returned to the Johnson house, which was quite near to the ice rink, and had cold drinks while we discussed the new development in the Gillian saga. Mrs. Johnson was very concerned to hear about Barbara but was most amused when we told her that Gillian had deputized so successfully. Mrs. Johnson went out but returned to the lounge a little later with a serious face. I have just phoned Barbara's mum who says that they x-rayed Barbara's head and she has a hairline fracture of her skull. She has regained consciousness and is fine but will be off all physical exercise for at least 2 months. The producer of the ice show is most distressed but says that she already has an excellent replacement, some new girl called Gillian," said Mrs. Johnson with a twinkle in her eye. My heart skipped 3 beats and I started shaking like a leaf at this news. This was all getting to be too much. Barbara's mum knows that Gillian is staying here, so she will bring all the costumes over later this afternoon. All the costumes? What does that mean? I stammered. Oh, don't worry, said Joan, they are all stretchy and will fit you perfectly. But that's not what I'm worried about, said I. What else will I need to do on the ice? Well, answered Joan, Barbara leads a group of ballet dancers that entertains the people during supper. She also does a solo duet with Brian during the entertainment. Am I expected to do all that? I asked, my voice shaking with anxiety. Of course, answered Joan with a happy smile. On that terrifying note we went to a new subject, the party. It was very quickly decided that I would accompany Brian to the party instead of Barbara and Joan would ask Alan Bin to partner her. So we all went off to Bath and get ready for the party. Mrs. J had insisted that I stay at her house so that I could dress for the party in the evening. A full set of party clothes had been sorted out for me and I was hustled off to Bath. The feeling of smooth legs was really nice and I looked forward to the feel of my satin party dress on them. I also washed my longish hair ready for Mrs. Johnson to blow, dry it into a feminine style. When my hair had been styled, Mrs. J put some black mascara on my eyelashes and plucked out a few wild eyebrow hairs, after which a touch of lipstick, eyeshadow and blusher completed my makeup. Now came the big thrill as the dressing routine began. My bra and panty girdle came next, followed by tight pink satin panties, and once again I carefully drew the light tan-colored stockings up over my smooth legs and clipped them onto the dangling elastic suspenders. A pretty pink satin full circular slip which went from 2 thin straps over my shoulders down to just above my knees. That slip was so very feminine and soft that I stood for a few minutes just reveling in the feeling of being a girl. I found that my movements and thoughts were beginning to be girlish, which was rather frightening. Was I changing into a girl? I put the thought away from me and got on with the delicious job of dressing for the party. The dress was made of pale pink organza, a thin transparent filmy material, which literally floated down over my slip. The long sleeves were caught at the wrist and the waist pulled tight when the zip was pulled up the back. The whole ensemble was finished off with a broad pink slipper satin sash, which went round my waist and tied in a big bow at the back. Finally, a string of white pearls was placed carefully round my neck and pink flat satin pumps were slipped onto my stocking-covered feet. I felt wonderful as I walked across the carpet, but nothing could beat the feeling I got when I looked in the full-length mirror and saw this glorious girl standing before me. The makeup had done wonders in feminizing me. I spun round a few times and was glad to see that the slip and dress flew out, showing my slim stocking-covered legs. I remember thinking wistfully how lucky girls are to be able to wear such lovely clothes. Joan was in a scarlet satin dress which perfectly matched her raven black hair and milk white skin with pink cheeks. She looked stunning, as did my friend Brian, who was in his white colours blazer which he had been awarded for tennis. His eyes lit up when he saw me coming down the stairs, and this made my heart beat a tad faster. Joan sat in the front of the car with Mrs. J and Brian, and I sat in the back holding hands. What delicious madness this was, but I was committed and there was no going back now. We picked up Alan Bean at his house and drove to the school hall, which had been beautifully decorated. Joan and Alan got on well, but Joan had told me earlier that although she was attracted to me when I was a boy, she was also mad about me as a girl. What a situation! The first dance started and I suddenly realized that I had never taken the girl's part and danced backwards. When Brian took my hand and led me onto the floor, lo and behold, I took the girl's part quite naturally and there was no problem. In fact, I loved being led around the floor by this handsome boy. The band played In the Mood and Brian and I jived in great style. When I spun round, my skirt and slip flew out and the boys got a great view of my pretty legs and pink panties. The evening passed without a hitch even when I danced with Alan. The only frightening moment was when I was introduced to my own headmaster and had to take his hand and curtsy. Another scary moment was when inevitably I needed to visit the toilet. I went with Joan to the girls' toilet and had to keep a cool head, especially when I did my makeup in front of the mirror with all the other girls. During the evening it became very hot and Brian suggested that we walk in the garden to cool off. It was sheer bliss to walk hand in hand on the lawn under the stars, and I felt so feminine when Brian put his arm around my waist. He was so protective and I had an overwhelming desire to kiss him. How could I do this? A boy kissing a boy? But maybe it was a girl kissing a boy? At last we parted and Brian said in a breathless and shaking voice, "Oh Gillian, although I know you're a boy, I think you're very pretty and I love you very much." "I love you too, Brian," I said in an equally shaky voice. With that we heard someone approaching and so we started walking back to the hall. The dance was a wonderful success, especially the slow dances when we could steal a kiss or two with the lights low. We eventually arrived home tired but very happy, and after I had kissed Brian goodnight 20 times, I went to the spare room to find Joan waiting for me to help me undress. As a bit of fun she had lent me a babydoll nightie with cute frilly pants and I put this on with relish. I was very tired and went off to sleep within seconds. Sunday morning dawned bright and clear and I awoke to a surprise as I had forgotten that I was still wearing my babydoll nightie. When I returned to the bedroom, Joan had been in and had left my tennis clothes on the bed ready for me. I was in for another new clothes experience, which looked very exciting. After my bath I put on the tight satin tennis panties which had a few rows of soft white frills at the back. They were made of some stretchy material, which succeeded in preserving my shape. The tennis dress fitted beautifully and when zipped up the back gave me that same snug, secure feeling that I had experienced when dressing in my party dress. The bodice showed my young breasts off beautifully and of course the ultra-short flared skirt showed my well-shaped legs to advantage. A pair of white tennis socks and tennis shoes completed the picture. I peeped in the mirror before going downstairs and was impressed with my sexy look. Brian would have to watch his step. Speak of the devil, as I was halfway down the stairs, there was my new boyfriend standing with a huge grin on his face as a cheeky puff of wind up the stairs lifted my skirt and he caught a flash of white panties. It really was fun to walk about looking so much like a girl with boobs and all, and feeling so delicious. I really was beginning to walk and look and feel like a real girl, which was at once frightening and thrilling. The Johnson family remarked on how good I looked and teased me that I really would have to remain a girl, what with all the ice skating, dancing, and orchestra. I pointed out that this was all to get me used to being a girl for the orchestra concert and I had no intention of becoming a girl permanently. I was sure that the concert would be easy compared to what I had already done. When breakfast was finished, Alan arrived to make up the fourth and we trooped out onto the court. Joan was wearing white shorts, as I had her dress, so her slim brown legs were very much in evidence. She warned me to bend my knees when picking up a ball and not to bend down like a boy, otherwise I would show my frilly panties and drive the boys mad. I am usually a good tennis player, but on this occasion I found myself playing much softer as a girl would. After lunch Brian had to go off to play tennis at school. Joan and I went to have a sleep in our cool bedrooms. I was dressed in a cool cotton gingham dress and lay on my tummy on the bed enjoying the feel of my breasts. I was almost asleep when I heard the Johnsons' car leave the driveway. I peeped out of the window and saw that Mr. and Mrs. J had left the house to Joan and me. I was sure that Joan would get up to something and I wasn't disappointed as in a few minutes I heard the door of my room softly open. I pretended to be asleep as Joan crept quietly onto the bed beside me. She snuggled up and lay still while I tried to keep my wildly beating heart from jumping right out of my chest. Eventually I could no longer bear the strain and I opened my eyes to look straight into her big blue eyes. We discovered that the following day was a public holiday and so Mrs. J asked my mother whether I could stay the night. This was agreed and we settled down to watch TV and have a TV supper on our laps. I was still barefoot and enjoying the freedom of wearing a dress. When there was no more to watch we all trooped off to bed. This time I was given a red satin shorty nightie to wear. When the house was quiet, I again heard my door open and in came Brian in his pajama shorts with bare top. He came over to my bed and lay down beside me. The first kiss was very different to Joan's kisses, as it was much more aggressive and not so gentle as Joan's. After a few minutes, more footsteps passed my door and the sound of the Johnsons' door closing. The magic was gone and Brian gave me a quick kiss before quietly heading back to his own room. That was the end of the preparation weekend, but it was also the start of wonderful relationships with Joan and Brian, which lasted for many years. The next step was the lead up to the prize giving and the ice show, which were to have many exciting moments.